in Luke's Gospel, we must not forget that Jesus is still on the road to Jerusalem. He continues on the journey to Jerusalem with his disciples here. They find themselves in a synagogue. And a woman appears. She has been crippled for 18 years. When I first read that, I thought about my great aunt Esther, who died at age 98, probably 15 years ago. And she had a disease, a spinal disease, that caused her to simply bend over, and she was about that tall. I remember when she died. Crippled, physically crippled by the disease. And I recall one day she said, "Well, I'll quit driving when I can no longer see over the top of the dash." Thank God she did. But healed in different ways. Different ways. This is an amazing passage. It's amazing in that the first part of it, if you could just take the first part of it and read it and drop the rest of it about what goes on with the synagogue leaders, man, we walk out of here just feeling great, right? She stands up straight. What an exhilarating thought for somebody hunched over, bent over, beaten down for 18 years. Stand up straight. But the plot thickens as you finish the story, where Jesus takes on this kind of literal understanding of Torah, of law. And Sundays is more than just not healing on the holy day. Beneath it is this deeper understanding. If keeping the law impedes caring for people who really need to be cared for, then the choice is an easy one. You break the law to fulfill it, right? That's the way you read it superficially. But then you move to this clash when you think about understandings of Sabbath. You see, there are two understandings that inform Sabbath here. One is out of Exodus 20, where Sabbath is linked to the whole idea of God's creation, God's creative power, where God, after 6 days of working, where God withdraws and rests. Implications of that are, so do we. It's simply healthy to take that day, that time for Sabbath. And then there's a second interpretation which comes out of Deuteronomy 5 and links the Sabbath to Exodus, to the Exodus, to what it means for a people who are in bondage to move to a place of freedom, a place of release, a place of deliverance from captivity. As I read this passage over and over, I get the sense that that's really what Jesus is talking about here when he heals this woman and confronts the religious leadership of that synagogue. Because it talks about the woman's illness as a bondage by Satan. And Jesus is saying, set her free! Set her free! And I think it reminds us, all of us, that we have a variety of captivities that we live in, and that somehow God comes into the midst of all of that, and from time to time we experience freedom. Jesus inviting us to look around at each other and to see the captivity of our friends and to be participant in their liberation, his disciples. You see, from this point of view, our day of worship, this day, isn't for the Lord. And that counters probably 80 or 90% of my preaching. where I tell you that we are in this place for the sake of praise to God. But here, worship is for us. It is for our well-being. It is for all who need rest and release and renewal and recreation. Jesus is talking about us. Sabbath is our freedom. Sabbath is our ability to be liberated to something else. But how many of us know that or live that? I think most of us. Many of us see Sunday morning as kind of obligatory. This is what I do on Sunday morning. I go to church. We even call it service to God. I go to church. That's what I do. It's about what we do for God. And that's not a bad thing. But that's not where Jesus is going today with his disciples. It's about what God does for us. It's about recognizing and remembering that at that table every Sunday. It's about remembering how God has freed us and others in our world. What if it's about recalling, as one does in Sabbath and Passover, the mighty acts of God, and daring to do those mighty acts as God has performed those mighty acts for us here, liberating us, putting us in a place of empowerment to empower others, even so far as to liberate us from a fear of death. How would our lives be different? How would our courage be empowered were we not to fear our death? When I talk about the mighty acts of God, I tend to think of the mighty acts of God in congregations. Sure, I read about them in the Bible, and truly they are mighty acts in the Bible. Okay. But I think about what it means for one of you to visit someone who's in a nursing home and the kind of liberating power of that. I think about the person who comes here after being beat down for years and years and years in some sort of relationship, somehow hears a piece of music like what you sang, or a word in a prayer, or connects with a friend in such a way that they are moved to a different place of wholeness and healing. I think about the mighty acts of God in terms of what you do when you leave this place and you see the guy singing with a guitar down on Kirkwood and you say, man, I like your music. Mighty acts of God that happen on a Sabbath, happen on a Sunday in worship, that cause us to experience God and one another in different ways. It calls for a connectivity, if you will, with each other that is extraordinary. A community that sees themselves as a whole family and shares life and all of its wondrous and good things, and sometimes life when it's not so good. And it calls for acceptance and reception of a God who will transform us. And a willingness to change because God will change us when God gets hold of us. That's just the fact of the matter. Name for me. Anyone. Name for me the mighty acts of God as you see them in your world. Where do you see that happen? This is your turn. Where do you see them happen? Yes? cancer survivor, our dear friend Amy, who goes through hell months and months and months. And you all call her, write her some cards, say, we're with you.
Happy birthday.
And happy birthday, Miss Amy. That's God at work. It's liberation. Anyone else? I've been in meetings this week in Indianapolis, and I'm becoming more sensitized as to what it does when I drop $1 in the plate and what a difference that means in Sudan. And the connection with people who need clean water, and how that is liberation. Or somebody there who helps them to drill a well, dig a well, to give them fresh water. Simple as that. All because I'm willing to receive a God that will bring liberation not just to me, but to that person in Sudan. What's it mean to people who are beat down, who are crippled in life, to be touched in such a way that they stand straight up? I can see my 4'8" Aunt Esther standing straight up. It's a miracle. So, I invite you to join me in prayer, to offer those joys and those concerns that you have to do with liberation. Who are you concerned about, or what are you concerned about that needs to experience God's great Sabbath? This liberation Passover. The floor is yours.